colleagues, welcome to this meeting of the Medway Council's Planning Committee. Can I first of all take apologies for absence? Councillor Golvin.
Councillor Mrs Carr.
Councillor Griffin. Thank you. Councillor Tijan.
Councillor Martin Potter.
Thank you. Councillor Van Dyke.
Councillor Stamp.
Thank you. As far as urgent matters are concerned, just to notify members that the application or the item on Garrison Point has been removed from this agenda. Can I ask you, please, when you're using your microphones, if you could actually speak into the microphone? I know it's natural for you to move your heads to and fro, but as you do, the sound goes down as you move from one side to the other, like that. So I would be grateful if you would speak into the microphone. Declarations of interest. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For agenda item 6, for St Nicholas School, I'm a school governor.
Sorry. Councillor Holcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the same item, I did a petition to stop the housing being put there, the housing that is complaining of the extension, but that was in 2003 when I was the deputy head teacher at a school round the corner, because I was worried about the windows overlooking the playground for very small children.
Yes, I will be standing down for that item because I'll be speaking to it.
As a ward member.
As a ward member.
Right. It's working now. That then takes us to the first item on the agenda, which is the application for land east and west of Cliffe. I understand that Mr. Harris has a Google Earth photo of this, which he's going to put up on the screen before we get into the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Hubbard just felt it would be beneficial to members if I show the Google Earth and our maps to show where Cliffe is in relation to the Wainscott bypass. So you have junction 1 here. Sorry, just junction 1 here. This is the Wainscott bypass that comes through. Then the B2000 comes up here through Cliffe Woods and all the way up to Cliffe. And this is the application site just in here. If that's okay, I will pass on to the case officer to present the application.
Thank you. Just to say that I have Councillors Elizabeth Turpin, Councillor Gary Etheridge and Councillor John Williams, who will wish to address you as local members. Do you agree in due course? Thank you. Hannah.
Oh, that's loud. This application is outline application for 250 dwellings, a community hub, the relocation of the sports ground and pavilion, open space provision and associated infrastructure at land east and west of Church Street, Cliffe. Just before commencing with the main presentation, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the supplementary agenda, which just sets out some additional representations that have been received. Right, so this application, the red line here, just shows the extent of the full site. There are 3 main areas to this planning application. We have the western parcel here, just showing that Church Street runs through the centre of Cliffe here, and then we've got the eastern parcel of land here, and then to the north is the northern parcel, which, as we'll see going through, is the area for the relocation of sports provision. This aerial photo just helps better understand the extent of the built environment here, and you can see some of the built-up areas and the housing within Cliffe. At this point to note as well that the application site lies in areas that, whilst adjacent to, do in fact sit outside of the rural boundaries of Cliffe. This plan just shows the application or the extent of the application site marked in red, and the areas highlighted in blue here are also additional land owned by the applicants, which obviously do not form part of this planning application. These plans here are helpful to understand some of the previous discussions that have been undertaken in relation to this site and Cliffe Village in relation to the Schlar. The original master plan that was drawn up showed the capacity for up to 500 units. I'll just putting it in context. You can see this is Church Street running up the middle. This is the western parcel. This is the eastern parcel. This is the area shown for sports provision. So the original area was significantly wider, and on this left-hand side, I could show that this area to note here along the eastern boundary with the byway, and where we've got Cooling Road running along here, just to note that there was a southern parcel as well within that site. Okay, so we move on to the illustrative master plan for this application. I will just stipulate that this is illustrative, so it is just representing what can be achieved on the site. So running through, the sports ground is on the northern parcel. On the very western edge, we have an area here which is dedicated to be open space. And then within the western parcel, we've got the first area for residential provision. Across from Church Street, we've then got the eastern parcel, again for residential provision. This just demonstrates the ability to achieve a SUDS programme throughout, and also that there can be play areas within the development itself. It should be noted that they are just indicative at this stage and not detailed. So this parameter plan here just sort of goes over what I've just previously said. So this is the area that will be the semi-natural open space, the sports provision to the north of the site, the residential areas in this sort of orangey-yellow colour, and these green parcels here just indicate the green spaces that would be provided throughout the residential aspect of the site. Again, just emphasising that this is an indicative plan, showing that the principle of these can be incorporated. Okay, this is a heights and density parameter plans. So on the left-hand side, we have a heights parameter plan. The darker orange colour here indicates a maximum height of 2.5 stories, where the lighter orange is indicating a 2-storey maximum height. This sort of grey-brown colour in the top corner of the residential on the western parcel is the location for the proposed community hub. This stipulates the community hub could be up to 12.5 metres in height, and just to put that in context, the average height of a 2.5-storey dwelling could be between 9 to 10 metres ridge height. So it would just be slightly higher than that, but again, that would be a maximum height capacity. The density plan on the right-hand side, the darker blue shows the highest area in density. By highest, it isn't necessarily high density, it would actually be in accordance with its rural setting, but the higher density would be central to the Church Street area, with the densities thinning out and getting slightly lower as we will move towards the edges of the boundaries. I've got an access and movement plan. It's not the clearest on this, however, I will just sort of highlight some of the colours. So the main points to look at here are the points of access within the parcels for the eastern and western parcels of land for the residential development. The blue arrows indicate the access points, and the dotted arrows just are indicating potential routes around the site. We have the green within the sites here and crossing over and through, just highlighting pedestrian accesses available through the site. And then I don't think it's particularly visible, but there's a purple line going up through here which indicates cycle and shared cycle and pedestrian movements that can be accommodated on that western side. Just some plans here showing a little bit more detail in relation to the proposed access points, this being the eastern parcel access point on Church Street. Just to put that into context, this is the BT Exchange building on the western side of the road. So just up from that. And then the western parcel is on the west side of Church Street, further up towards the boundary with the play area. Excuse me. This last plan just shows the access point from Butway Lane, which will be for the sports ground site only. Just to highlight here, there is an existing farm track access abutting the boundary of the site here, so the access point is slightly to the west of that. This is a proposed improvement shown to be on Station Road. These are roundabout Station Road and Cooling Road junction. This is a roundabout junction where the roundabout is being slightly amended, and what I would like to point out here as well is that this area of Station Road, there is a proposal to create a footpath here and a lay-by, which is for off-road parking provision for the existing residents on that Station Road element. This second picture shows the Cooling Road improvements, which as well improves more off-road parking, which obviously at the moment vehicles for the residential properties here park on the road, and there can be obstructions at times, so that's showing that improvement there. One of the additional mitigation proposals is at the junction of the off-slip for the A289 where it meets the B2000. So looking at the aerial here, this is just by the A289 flyover with the Wainscott roundabouts just down here. So there are some junction improvements shown here. And we're on to some photographs and some images. There are plans in the corner of these, which the red arrow shows the approximate location of where these photographs were taken. So this particular photo has been taken from Cooling Road. There is the byway running up this aspect of the site here. Oh, I don't know how to go back, so I won't, because this is a very similar image. It's fine. So again, this is where the pond would be located, potentially in the bottom east corner of the site. The byway running up the eastern side of the Tremple-owned land, but not abutting the boundary of the actual residential development. And then we've got Cooling Road running along here. Just so to note that this particular stretch along this side, adjacent to the byway, is not being developed and isn't part of the red line, apart from the pond in the corner. The residential development is further back into the site and would sit further in the background. This photograph, if we look at the map, you can see that this is of the western parcel. It's taken from quite near the BT Exchange building, just a bit further up. You can locate yourselves in relation to the chicane here. Just looking up through the site towards where the existing children's play area and allotments are. Again, this is the western side of the road, so this is where the boundary is with the telephone exchange, and this is just from the other side of the road, just a wider angle of that western parcel. This photograph is the eastern parcel of land taken from over the road, just trying to show the sort of full extent of the boundary here. It looks curved because I've merged the photographs. But what we can see on this left-hand side here, where this hedging is the existing bowls club, which is to remain. And then on the right-hand side here, not very clear, but in here you can see the existing tennis courts, part of the APCM site, which would be relocated. this is a clearer picture of those courts. And what I'd just like to point out within these photographs is the white properties over here, just so that we can sort of orientate ourselves. These properties here are in fact these properties on the corner here of Pen Road, and then in here are the properties that currently face onto the back of this land on Church Street here. These two photographs just show the location of the existing tractor access on Buckway Lane in relation to the boundary treatment, and then on the left-hand side here we can see some private access which goes to some land at the back of the houses that are adjacent to the site. This is a much wider photograph of the site, and it's actually taken from the corner of Buckway Lane and West Street. So this just shows a much longer view of the site, which would be set within that wider landscape. So the sports provision is in here, with the main development being much further down here. But just to put that in context, really, and the photograph, the map, sorry, in the top just shows it. And then this, I think it might be the final photograph, is taken from West Street. So this is taken looking across the site. And again, just to orientate members, if I can see on this. Right, so there's properties here, which I'm highlighting with the arrow, are actually the sides of the properties in Westmore Close. And then we've got these white properties here, which are the properties that sit in New Road. And these houses that sit back here are actually the houses that sit on the opposite side of the road on Church Street. So, members, this application has been carefully balanced within the report. In terms of the principle of this development, it does sit outside the rural boundaries of Cliffe within Greenfield site, and it is acknowledged that there is a loss of agricultural land, currently subgrade 3A and 2. However, members are aware of the council's position in relation to the 5-year housing land supply, and that has to be looked at with a tilted balance, which I'll just pick up in a moment. In terms of landscape impact, it's been concluded that the landscape impact is localised and limited. The development retains the green open spaces around Cliffe, and actually this application is to link the two existing parts of Cliffe Village. Overall, it's been considered to be acceptable in landscape terms. In terms of amenity, the existing residents will experience a loss of view. This isn't necessarily a planning consideration. There will be an impact on residents as a result of increased traffic movements. However, there will also be additional support within the village on existing facilities and services. In terms of highways, it's considered that there will be an impact on the highway network. The applicants have submitted sufficient modelling and justification within their submission, demonstrated that this can be accommodated, and whilst the impact is acknowledged, it is not considered to be severe. Proposed plans and mitigations are considered to be acceptable, and whilst the amenity impact is knowledge, again, I'll just emphasise that there's currently no consideration that this is a severe impact on highways grounds. The sports provision is for the relocation of the pitch, which currently sits here. So the sports provision is relocated. This does is considered to remain to be accessible to villagers within Cliffe, and as well as being accessible with sufficient footway and road access, it does also provide for improved facilities, as there will be the provision of a new sports pavilion and an increased number in pitches and courts. As previously stated, the lack of the 5-year housing land supply within Medway and not meeting our current housing delivery targets does put us in a position where there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. This has to be looked at within the 3 dimensions: the economic, the social and the environmental. In terms of economic, it's been considered that this application would lead to the creation of jobs, and once complete would also allow for the diversification of the labour market within the Cliffe area. It's also considered to support the existing village whilst also allowing for additional local spending. In terms of social provision, there is to be the 25% affordable homes provision. There are to be improved sports and community facilities within the area, which actually includes the creation of a new community hub within the heart of the village, and it will also be providing a mix of housing types and tenures. In terms of environmental, it remains that there will be access to green spaces, and biodiversity net gain throughout the proposal will have a minimum of 20% across the entire site. The application will also take into account climate change and sustainable building methods. Reflecting all of the above and subject to the recommendation that's been made and Section 106 contributions as set out in the report, the recommendation is for approval. And just finally, need to add that in addition to this supplementary agenda, could members please note that there needs to be an amendment made to condition 39. At the end of the first paragraph, the words "after consultation with Sport England" should be removed. Thank you.
Right, I understand that Councillor Williams wishes to speak first. Can I just say, Councillor Williams, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, members. Due to the rural location, reliance on the car will be higher than if in the urban location. Extra cars from the development would add even more congestion to the already congested B2000, Station Road and surrounding local roads, adding more noise and air pollution to that area that is without the 300 plus houses already being built in Cliffe Woods, adding to the problem. The local road infrastructure will not safely take any more traffic. It's unsustainable. The more traffic, the more danger to local residents. The overall provision of the proposed accesses on Cooling Road and Church Street will intensify local road issues. Vehicle speeds and congestion on Church Street from the Higham Cooling Station Road junction to the proposed east and west access has no effective mitigation proposed. Buttway access will intensify uses on a narrow country lane with very limited parking opportunities for two-way traffic. It also caused more problems locally, with traffic wanting to go to the Hoop Peninsula, the Medway Tunnel and beyond, having no access to east on the A289, would have to go down Hollywood Lane, causing more congestion through Wainscott Village, also adding to the serious traffic problems at Four Elms Roundabout. If this development goes ahead, it would be a loss of a large area of Grade 1-2 protected agricultural farmland. And with food security at the top of everybody's agenda, we need to protect our prime agricultural land to improve on the projected figures by the National Farmers Union that we only be able to produce enough food to feed 53% of our population by 2040. We have already lost considerable farming land locally to development. It's time to draw a line under these unwanted speculative developments, ruining our rural landscapes. Once agricultural land is built on, it is gone forever. I'd like to bring your attention to the DEFRA document Biodiversity 2020, a strategy for England's wildlife and ecosystems. The foreword by the DEFRA Secretary of State sets the scene and an extract states, we need to build a wider network of places across England which enable wildlife to thrive and natural resources to be sustained, among the other land uses as farming. I think that site fits this criteria. This development will have a negative impact on the local flora and fauna and could destroy the habitats of many species, just as woodpeckers, bats, slowworms and crested newts that live and breed locally. I have been made aware that house martins come back to the area to breed every year. The Medway Local Plan 203, Policy BNE 35, states that regarding international and national nature conservation sites, the Council is required to ensure long-term protection to national and international sites of nature conservation. I fear that will be a detrimental effect on local Ramsar, SSSI, SPA sites and the RSP Reserve at Cliffe Pools. I'd like to bring your attention to two of Medway Council's own documents. The Medway Strategic Land Availability Assessment dated December 2019. On page 66 states, the site east and west of Church Street, which covered this application, was excluded when classed as unsuitable due to the impact on agricultural land, landscape and heritage. This is the Council's own words. Also on page 39 of the Medway Landscape Character Assessment 211, and the guidelines states to resist development proposals that lack for historic rural character of the area. Development proposals, where considered appropriate, should seek to strengthen landscape structure, historical character, and enhance local distinctiveness. This application, in my opinion, does not do that. No weight has been given to either the IPCM, which is now registered as an asset of community value, or the Developing Neighbourhood Plan. The relocation of a sports ground from a central, easy accessible site to an out-of-the-way site down a narrow country lane with overhead power lines is unacceptable. Local schools are already oversubscribed, and this development only exacerbates the problem. The doctor's surgery is under pressure, and I feel it would struggle to cope. I feel the extra pressures putting on all limited local services will be disastrous for Cliffe and his residents, and is totally unsustainable. There is limited retail outlets in the village, and I feel the proposed community hub will be in direct competition to the already well-established and well-used village hall and social club. This is a long-standing rural community, and people here live here because of that reason. So please do not help destroy it. With objections from the parish council, 3 Medway councillors, and in excess of 200 from local residents, plus the members of the Cliffe and Cliffe Woods Residents Development Group, it is obviously not wanted by residents, and the devastating effect it will cause on the rural setting of the village. It is to be noted that Kelly Tollis MP has also sent a letter to the Secretary of State asking to review this application. I would ask this application to be refused to help protect the surrounding agricultural land, this rural community, and the biodiversity of the area. Chairman, members, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. I strongly oppose this application for the following reasons. Cliffe is not a sustainable location for development of this size. It is a unique rural village on the peninsula and sits at the end of the B2000, a road which, if any members have driven down, is unsafe for cyclists and totally unacceptable for pedestrians due to the lack of pavement. It is also not just about the capacity on this road, but also the suitability for larger vehicles due to its width in many parts. I watched the planning committee with interest and of last time and noted Councillor Hackwell's comments about the development on the outskirts of Rainham being not suitable as you need a car to live there. This is very much the case for Cliffe. With limited amenities within the village, travelling into Medway towns is a necessity. It's worth noting that the Transport's application, they mention amenities that have not existed for the last 7 to 20 years, such as the Evening Star and the Black Bull pubs. The closest supermarkets are around 5 miles away. To put that into perspective, if you live in the centre of Rochester, that is the equivalent of travelling through Chatham, Gillingham and well into Rainham, all with choice along the way and public transport to use too. Public transport in Cliffe is not reliable, nor is it regular enough to be of much use to residents. An hourly service which stops in the early evening, parents will be their child's taxi service in and out of the village. Young people of secondary school age will require a council bus pass as there are no secondary schools within 3 miles and there are no safe walking routes to any of these schools. Now, the residents of Cliffe do not complain about this sense of isolation that I describe. They have chosen to live within this unique and beautiful part of Medway. They are passionate about protecting its environment and rural setting. Based on the average household size, the population of Cliffe is around 2,600. 250 homes will bring at least 600 people. That makes a population increase of almost a quarter. Surely no one would find that acceptable or describe it as a sustainable development. The land on the east side of Church Street is the APCM recreation ground. As the report highlights, this facility was registered as an asset of community value. Now, while this application proposes to relocate that site and therefore retain the provision, it is not that straightforward. Currently, it sits quite centrally within the village and benefits from clear sight lines. This allows users of all ages to feel safe at all times of the day. The proposed new site accessed from Medway Lane, another small country lane with little to no pavement. It is also a secluded location with no clear lines of sight, which residents have highlighted they would not feel safe using, nor would it be suitable for a young person alone or accompanied to walk to the proposed site. Another very significant concern is the high voltage overhead cables which this site sits directly beneath, a major hazard for many sports and recreational activities. This report makes reference to the independent workshops that took place within the local community to understand their concerns and wishes regarding this development. However, this took place during a pandemic, was online, many dispute actually being invited, the notice period was short, badly advertised, and as a result was poorly attended. It is therefore clear that the outcome of this engagement did not in any way reflect the desires of the Cliffe community. As was on the agenda this evening and at the last committee, Section 106 does not seem to be guaranteed. Will money see the light of day? Will the affordable housing get delivered? However, I do not want to focus on Section 106 contributions, some of which are proposed to be spent some distance from Cliffe, as I do not think they mitigate for the negative impacts this development would bring. There is also disparity within the report about the agricultural land and its grading. Our SLA of 2015 states that this site is situated on the best and most versatile agricultural land, yet we are now expected to accept that it is actually subgrade 3A and grade 2, which I should add is still very good quality. Other reports also support the grading of this land as grade 1. It's unfortunate that only 4 members of this committee managed to visit the site last month with the planning department. I do hope that members not familiar with Cliffe have the opportunity to go, as it really does need to be seen in person what the effect a development of this size would have on the community. Also to walk and drive down the roads that would be accessed for all parts of this application. Cooling Road, one not yet mentioned by me, struggles to function in its current capacity of serving a few properties, so being an access to this development would bring it to its knees. It is also a road which experiences flooding, as does Well Pen. The fields in this area also become waterlogged. These locations are directly downhill from the proposed site and as such are likely to experience increased levels of flooding. There is no mention of these issues within the planning report. Of course, it has been explained, planning applications have to be decided on weight, but there are too many reasons why this application is not suitable and outweigh any conclusions as to why it should be approved. Thank you.
Councillor Etheridge.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to address this committee. Members here will recall that I wrote to some of you some time back, alerting you to a number of facts in relation to this application, along with extreme concerns in relation to the proposed 106 allocation payments, which did not appear to be compliant with either being fair, transparent, or spent on facilities that could be demonstrated to be in the locality of this development. This evening, I'm here to reflect and voice the concerns of the community of both Cliffe and Cliffe Woods in that local people's knowledge of the site, its surroundings, approaches and environment is fully understood and taken into account. The Cliffe Woods community believes it would cause a further unbearable strain in terms of a large increase of motorised traffic into the rural village of Cliffe Woods, introducing potential health safety hazards and a decline in the quality of life of the residents along the B2000 leading into Town Road. Further along the B2000, when it becomes Station Road, once we have passed the junction with Rectory Road, due to current road conditions with parked vehicles and 2 further pinch points due to speed restriction chicanes, the restricted road is a single car's width up to and including the proposed application site. Therefore, this road is totally inadequate for the purpose of the proposed site and the anticipated additional of motorised private traffic. Once the site has been developed, it is my belief that the data supplied by Tremport seriously underestimates traffic flows over the entirety of the B2000 to their proposal. It is implausible that 4 years of excavation, construction, noise and vibration of machinery will not have an effect not only on residents but also the existing wildlife, leading to a degradation of the environment and natural beauty. This development will only result in congestion, frustration, along with additional hazards affecting health and the well-being of the people of both communities. Members who attended the site visit were able to see that although Cliffe itself over the years has seen some new development, this application would totally dominate and harm the existing accommodation and existing community. It is inconceivable that approximately an increase of almost 25% of residential properties will not have an adverse effect on a small village. More importantly, in my view, no consideration has been given to the adverse effects and health of the local community and infrastructure of the potential additional 1,000 plus new residents being introduced into a remote and rural setting. With the limited facilities currently available in terms of public transport, local shopping, health and health provision, basically guarantees that the private car will be the dominant form of transport, which is totally unsustainable. Those that attended were also able to view the site of new playing fields, which once again is totally inappropriate, being sited along a single land road with no street lighting or footpaths. Not only is this extremely dangerous for the residents of the area, but would be hazardous for any visitors transporting team members or supporters for any future game fixtures. The Cliffe community believes that the considerable opposition to this application registered on Medway's Council's planning portal is being ignored by the planning department. This application will form an unnecessary and unwarranted intrusion into the countryside and will become extremely detrimental not only to the residents of Cliffe but also Cliffe Woods, through which the additional traffic will have to pass through. Finally, Chairman, members, Southern Water has stated quite clearly that the system regularly needs attention at Cliffe Pumping Station, with tankering events of increased regularity. A sudden demand of these services is likely to worsen the situation. Just this week, 4 pumping sewage lorries are required to pump up the sewage from Cliffe and Cliffe Woods up and over to Lodge Hill, as the system is already under strain, requiring the additional extra resource. Therefore, members, I would strongly urge members to take on board all the information you have read, seen and heard and vote against this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Etheridge. Thank you. Right, members, you've heard the planning officer, you've heard the local members. I'll go now to those who wish to speak. Councillor Buckwell. Right, I have Councillor Buckwell, Councillor Hackwell, Councillor Tranter, Councillor Goldwyn. Right, hang on a minute, keep your hands up. Yeah, thank you. Right. Councillor Buckwell. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members. I must say, it wasn't until 39 years ago that I first visited Cliffe, when I was putting a few leaflets round for the late Peggy Fenn MP, when that area came into what was then the Medway constituency. But I visited it many, many, many times since, with and without leaflets. I thank Ms Gunner for the presentation. I thank the 3 Strood Rural Ward members for their carefully thought out observations. The extent of the site, I think, is itself significant. I've been around on this and the previous council over nearly 40 years, and I can't remember, certainly in the term of this present council, an application which touched so many parts of a village on the Hoo Peninsula as this does. So if one looks at the Ordnance Survey extract on members' agenda papers 14, we have those variant sites, and that is different from a lot of the applications that we receive and decide upon for villages. So even in the volume, the percentage of the area within Cliffe village that will be affected by this decision, it is significant. It is significant. Of course, the parish of Cliffe and Cliffe Woods is in the 2 parts, the 2 parish wards, Cliffe Woods and then Cliffe Village. So within Cliffe Village itself, this has an even greater significance. But as Councillor Etheridge specifically referred to, this of course has a significance for Cliffe Woods as well. Why is that? Well, Cliffe is at the end of the road, quite literally. Sure, you can go along Reed Street and get to Cooling and Spendith. You can go along Cooling Road and get to Cooling Street and then on to Cooling. You can cut through to the parish of Higham, as their parish council representations say. But in essence, it isn't quite like Grain or All Hallows, but it's not far different. This is at the end of the road. I find that potentially to be significant. Madam Chairman, for the openness of our meeting and the transparency, I think it's perhaps helpful to explain to those observing that the protocol of a planning committee is that it is for the vice chair, happens to be me, to move for approval the recommendation of the professional officers. As we know, that recommendation is to approve. However, the fact that the Vice Chair moves that does not bind the Vice Chair to vote for it. And that is relevant to the points, if I may, that I now come on to. So please, those observing, don't be shocked. Don't get the wanted posters up because I move approval, because I won't be voting for my own motion. Cliffe Woods will be affected by this. Again, Councillor Etheridge emphasised this point. We are putting every vehicle, pretty well every vehicle, that would require to go to these new sites through Cliffe Woods Parish Ward, along that road, along Town Road, into Station Road, etc., etc. That is significant, and I think that we should give weight to that. These developments involve such a number of properties, and with due respect to any potential occupiers, such a number of new folk, probably, coming into Cliffe Village, that it will change the village in various ways, but it will change the village. The roads are narrow. We know they have the chicanes, etc., along Station Road, Church Street, but essentially those main roads are narrow, and that is significant because the proposal involves significant use of Buttway Lane, itself narrow, but yet you've got to get to Buttway Lane in the first place, so you take that full route through the village. There's the relocation of the established recreation area, and I've noted carefully the points made in writing by residents, the parish, and from what we've heard from the members this evening. And changing a well-established recreation area, I think itself is significant. Madam Chairman, there is an argument which I believe can be rationally and reasonably applied for some, and I underline some, villages on the Hoo Peninsula to take further development in order to enable their sustainability overall. Here, I think the very reverse applies. Here, the sustainability of Cliffe Village is there, it's established. And the question is it right to put all these extra properties in there? And we cannot pick and choose. We cannot tonight say, oh, we would allow some of these houses to be built. We can't do that. We have to decide on the application as it is and as it is before us. And for every member of this committee tonight, we have, as officers have to when they're looking at their recommendation, we have to draw a balance. We have to balance the scales one way or another. Critically for all of us, it is for us individually as elected members to decide what weight we give to all of those arguments that we have to weigh. And that's why it's part of a democratic process, and perfectly correct that it should be so. So, Madam Chairman, in conclusion, my assessment of that balancing act is that the factors favouring refusal of this application significantly outweigh the arguments which quite properly have been put forward and which officers judge should favour approving this application. So I will later be moving approval, but with pleasure I will be voting against my own proposal. Thank you.
Right, I have Councillor Tranter.
Sorry, Chair, that was me. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Yeah, thank you for that, and I'm grateful to the ward councillors. I know the area incredibly well. In fact, I had an office there for some years. I've cycled there many, many times. I've walked around the area. I think I know most of the footpaths. I was unable to make the visit because I had another engagement, but I feel very, very well briefed. I've certainly read everything. I've read the complaints. I've read everything from the local council and the most recent notes in the report and so on. I think this is really, really important to emphasise this. And I wanted to make a general point here. My good friend, Councillor Buckwell, talks about democracy. Of course, this decision is not, this committee is in a sense not democratic, it's quasi-judicial. In other words, we have to weigh evidence and not just vote for or against something because we like it or don't like it. And so that's what I have tried to do very, very carefully indeed. And I wanted to say that because sometimes we vote in ways which is not always popular, but there's hopefully very good reasons for it. Many of the issues and concerns about this application are not valid, but I have focused on two areas which I think are incredibly valid against this. And first of all, I would like to talk about social impact, which is a justifiable reason for refusal. Councillor Buckwell touched on it, and that it relates to the unique location of this village, and it is very much a village. To the north, we have the marsh areas. To the west, we have the Cliffe pools. To the east, we've of course got Cooling. I mean, it is the most extraordinary place, and it has its very important little village centre with some delightful older properties there. I think the impact of something like a greater than 20% increase of population on that would, to my mind, irreparably destroy the local community. And that I put very, very high up my list. I do not see how any developer can overcome that. They can put in an extra shop, or, you know, we can get more doctors perhaps, or whatever. Those things are possibly solvable. They're still a problem, but they're possibly solvable. But I do not think that we, as a committee, should be in the business of allowing communities to be irreparably damaged and destroyed. I believe this proposal, if it went forward, would do that. And that is top of my list. And by the way, I was not taken in by the developers talking about 500 and then graciously bringing it down to 250. I know full well if they got 250, they'll be back up to 500 again as soon as they can, because by that time they would have destroyed the village anyway, and they would be saying, well, we may as well finish the job. So I'm deeply concerned about the social impact and the fact that we change the character of that area forever, and I don't see a way out of it. And I'd also like to touch on the roads around there. And this is even more difficult for the developers to overcome. I'm a fairly confident cyclist, and I've been up and down the B2000 countless times. But it is scary, especially when those Brett lorries, come a bit too close. I think local folk have got to learn to live with those lorries, but I probably wish they weren't there, but hey, they are, and they're a part of life. But it is quite a scary road. It's very narrow. There's no hope that I can see of improving that significantly. I don't think there are any other really practical routes for cyclists, and even though I'm a confident cyclist, I wouldn't want my grandson or some, others who are less confident ever going down there. So everyone's going to be forced onto the roads, and some of them might choose to think, well, that's such a difficult road to be going along. It's going to get busy at times if we have this increase in traffic. Perhaps more people will then start to explore the little lanes through Cooling and so on. Well, anyone that's cycled or walked or driven up there knows that's beautiful, quaint little roads with wonderful character, absolutely hopeless, as in many ways they're little better than tracks. and you forever stopping and reversing, which is fine. That's what happens in the countryside. There is no scope for it to increase any traffic as you head towards the west. So this is a balanced decision, nevertheless. I don't think it is black and white. I'm also mindful that I have children, as many others do here, who want to own a home of their own. We have many properties in Medway in the southeast and across the country that are overcrowded. We need additional housing, and we have to make difficult decisions. But last week, and in fact, my colleague here mentioned it, that we approved, actually I didn't, but this committee as a whole turned down, I should say, 2 applications in Rainham that were right by the A2 on the grounds of the impact on traffic. And they were, I would suggest, a quarter or less, a fifth the size of this particular development, each of them. So I think on that basis, Madam Chairman, I will not be supporting this application because I do not believe there are any solutions to the traffic on the roads, and I think the impact on the communities there are not acceptable either now or any time in the future. Thank you.
I will now go to Councillor Galvin, after which I will go to Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't think there's going to be many planning applications coming to this committee which are going to be easy to decide in the future. All the low-hanging fruit has long been picked. Practically every single site that I know of that's going to come in the future is going to come with severe disadvantages. On the other side of the argument of providing homes, in fact, we haven't provided enough homes, not just in Medway, but across the whole country for the last 40 years. That shortage of housing, homes, combined with an oversupply of cheap credit has led to a toxic position where many of our young people are totally priced out of the housing market. The ratio of average earnings to average house prices in Medway is 8.5%, a huge hurdle for any young person to get onto the housing market. In absence of a local plan, current local plan, we have now got a very large gap between the 5-year land supply and what we will be able to produce. We've got just over 3, I believe, instead of the 5. All these arguments will be put far more eloquently than I ever could by a highly paid QC at the subsequent planning inquiry that will come after this tonight. Having said that, I think there is occasions when you have to draw a line and say this is not acceptable, even though the officers have put up some very good arguments of why this application could be acceptable. They've pretty well batted most of the objections back to one degree or another, quite ably, as they normally do. But I think in this case, this is one case where it is worth digging one's heels in and digging them in firmly. As my colleague Councillor Buckwell said, this development really is at the end of a road. And Cliffe does have some quite unique characteristics that do not exist in many other parts of Medway. So I, with a clear conscience, as much as I am passionately in favour of providing housing for people, I will be voting against this application this evening. But having said that, having sat now, this is the third planning committee I've been able to substitute on in a row, I believe colleagues and I hope they will take this in a nice way, because I don't want to be insulting to people, but I think we've turned down applications, certainly when I've sat on the last two plan commissions, that haven't got a hope in hell of standing up to the aforesaid highly paid, very articulate QC that will, or KC, I've just been corrected. Yes, I fell into the trap. My colleague, Councillor Buckwell, has corrected me. It will be KC, of course. But this one, I think, is worth defending. But I would just advise colleagues that let's be selective about where we do dig our heels in, because we've got to be able to put up a strong case when these things do go to appeal. And the more we turn down, the less we're going to be able to defend these ones. And I think this is a case where we've really got to defend it. But there are others that are a little bit more marginal. I'm not saying any of those decisions will be easy. They're not going to be easy. But I think this one is worth defending. It's not an area I know particularly well because I represent Walderslade, but as an example of how things have changed, I'll be going home tonight to a plot of land that in my childhood was a dairy farm. You know, that has changed out of all recognition. If we're going to provide homes for people, a lot of places are going to have to change and change dramatically, as Walderslade and Princes Park, the areas I live in and represent, have changed. But having said that, we can't change everywhere. We've got to have some countryside. We've got to have some places for people to walk and enjoy open countryside. And I think this is one that's worth fighting for. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Hubbard.
Oh dear, Councillor Galvin, really, you're wrong again. We made the right decision at the last committee on those two items. I know you're running scared of developers, and you're a board member of a development company yourself. So you do come with a fixed opinion upon many things, and one of those things is that you're wrong. We made the right decision last time around. We need to make the right decision on this application as well. If we thought putting a small amount of houses onto right adjacent to an aid road was unacceptable, we're now talking about putting a large number of houses miles and miles down a country lane. It's a B2000, the Millennium Road, B2000. But it really is not fit for purpose for any huge development size. We've been talking about Cliffe Woods earlier on, or I should say Councillor Buckwell, and then we were talking about large developments there, but then I voted against the last planning application for that site as well, because in my view, it was sticking too much onto the B2000. I know there's people who said, well, it's the right side of Cliffe Woods. It wouldn't be putting so much traffic onto the B2000. But that was wrong as well. We should have been much tougher with developers, which are trying to ruin our inheritance, our landscape. Now, my knowledge of Cliffe does go back a fair number of years, until when I first was looking to buy a property in this area, and I drove around the area looking to where was suitable to near where I worked. That's the first time I ever visited Cliffe. In fact, I've heard of Cliffe before that, because one of my colleagues who was actually working locally down here told me how I could get myself to Medway City Estate, what came Medway City Estate, and he mentioned the word Cliffe, because that's where he lived. But Cliffe Village itself is something that my father-in-law knows very well. It was the village he was brought up in. He was a small child. It was a village that was isolated from the Medway towns by a considerable distance. My father-in-law talks about as a child having idyllic days down on the marshes with his air rifle. I'm not quite sure why his air rifle, but there you go. But he would talk about taking the train from Cliffe to days' trips to All Hallows, where my parents-in-law lived for some time, and out to Gravesend to go shopping. He never talked about getting into the Medway towns to do anything. So we're talking about a village that was isolated, and it still is isolated. It actually has grown, but it's still what it is. It's the end of a little country lane. And the importance of the landscape in the area can't be understated. But let's imagine you're driving along. You drive along from my ward, along the B2000, and you're okay for a while until you get to Mockburger Farm. And then it becomes incredibly narrow and dangerous. And you get into Cliffe Woods, and you've got the chicanes there. You're moving slowly through the area. The other side of Cliffe Woods, again, you've got a very narrow, tight road, and two Brett lorries allow you to really pass each other with ease. And you come to the station, and it's pretty well straight, but then suddenly you're smack into Cliffe itself and its chicanes and such like. So I know the site village very well, but I hadn't really thought through the impact of this application in full until we went to the site visit, because we went off and down to where the relocated sports facilities would be. And then you realise that what you're doing is that people who are coming to use those existing sports facilities don't drive down or have to negotiate the rest of Church Street, let alone to Buckwell Road. And the chicanes, it's narrow, and then around the corner by the church, it is really down to the size of a country lane. And we're talking about significant amounts of traffic in a short period of time trying to access that site. It's not an ideal location for an alternative site, and nonsense. When the developer came to committee for the first time to do a presentation, say, to council, and they had the development of 500 units, I think my immediate thought was, WTF, what on earth are they thinking? At that time, that was going to increase the village by 50%. Now they've knocked it down to 250, and as Councillor Trancher said, that's just the start, isn't it? Because they started with 500, they'll go back to 500 and more. So the moment you're looking to increase the village by another quarter, that's ridiculous. So more than anything, this should be refused on highways terms, because it is a wrong location for the size of development. If we were talking about a development nearer to the urban edge, that would be different. I had a resident speak to me about do you think I might be able to develop the land where I live? And I said, well, you're the right end of the B2000, e.g. you're smack on top of the urban area. You're not at the wrong end. So I can't support this application, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Councillor Horcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't live very far from Cliffe Woods. I live in Strood, but I did do the site visit, and I was really shocked at the plans and how Dave Harris explained to us how, these houses, 250, were going into near a road which was really a bridleway. I'm disabled, so I have quite a sizable car, but I barely could get a 3-point turn on my vehicle down this road. I think it's a really gross overdevelopment. It's going to disturb a rural community. It's going to cause a nuisance, it's overbearing, it clashes with the needs and what the local people want. I mean, there is no positive thing that I can say about it. The poor B2000, we've had fatalities. I know as a teacher, when I was a teacher in Medway, the villagers were successful at getting speed limit down. But, you've got to think of the bypass. I teach in Greenwich. I can spend 20 minutes coming off the A2 to get onto the bypass as it is. So if you're overdeveloping Cliffe, which is at the, it's like the road to nowhere, there's nowhere else to go, then actually the impact, the pollution is just going to be devastating, and I'm not prepared to vote for this development because I cannot see anything positive about it, only negativity.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm continuing the theme, unfortunately. I don't think I can match 40 years of knowing that site, but certainly 35. I worked out there back in the 1980s and 90s, so I know the area well. I didn't make the site visit, so apologies for that, but it is a site I know well. I just wanted to pick up some details, actually, rather than going off repeating what colleagues have said. I'd like to draw members' attention to page 21 of the report, conditions, 20 and 21, conditions 12, 13 and 14, which deal with the mitigation of highways issues. And I'm just wondering as to why those are conditions following the application being approved, as opposed to conditions that should be in place before we decide anything. I mean, no development shall take place until the details of highway works have been submitted. Well, let's get the details of the highway works in before we approve anything and see what they're actually proposing to do. And similarly with condition 13, no development shall take place until details of following highway works have been submitted. We need to see that this road is not capable of taking that additional traffic without highway works. We need to know what those are and the details of them before we go anywhere near approval, in my view. The impact on the wider Medway area is significant. The Wainscott bypass cannot cope with the accumulation of traffic that is happening as a result of the development on the Hoop Peninsula. We know that for a fact because there's £170 million worth of money from the government to try and cope with it. And that's not probably going to be enough. So adding into the mix this cumulative impact, the Wainscott bypass itself is suffering. So they've got some real problems there, and equally with the final condition 14, final detailed travel plan encouraging sustainable forms of transport. Colleagues have already pointed out that people will be just driving from there. They're not going to get on a bus, they're not going to walk, and they're not going to cycle because it's too far down the road into the countryside. So I think those conditions need to be looked at again in detail. So I've got concerns over that. Page 45, if I may, Chair, which talks about the bottom of page, let me just try and get my laptop to work. There we go. The bottom of page 45 goes, 46 and 45 goes, it talks about the local landscape value and the impact on the local landscape. The designation of an area of local landscape importance has been challenged time and time again. They go back to the previous 2003 local plan, and every time they challenge it, almost degrades that designation and makes it completely worthless. But actually, as we've heard from colleagues and heard certainly from the ward councillors, the value of the landscape there is actually very, very high, and we should really put a huge amount of weight onto this designation. I cannot see this designation changing in the new emerging local plan from what it is at the moment. So I think that's another material consideration. And it actually goes on to more detailed about what we mean by sustainable development. If the development is going to detract from the landscape and the environment, if it's going to detract from the social benefits of the area, which we've heard colleagues mention already, and equally, I cannot see the economic benefit of this development. We hear the words diversification of local labour market. What does that mean in a village like Cliffe? What's the diversification of the local labour market? This isn't an economic benefit. Those are just words that have been pulled out of the air to try and justify something that actually can't be justified. I don't see this as a sustainable development according to the guidelines we find in the National Planning Policy Frameworks on what we mean by sustainable development. So I've got a real problem with that. And as has been mentioned, we've got issues around the fact that this is a B road, and we've already looked at A roads. The A2 is not capable of taking more traffic. Certainly B roads are not capable of taking more. And then finally, we talk on page 55 about people walking from here to Cliffe. Well, again, it goes back. That's not going to happen. Let's be realistic about this. People will get in their car and drive because that's that's the nature of our culture at the moment. So we have to be really careful. And then the final point I want to make is around Section 106 funding. We know how fragile that is now. We have time after time. I'm sure Councillor Galvin can give us chapter on verse on how fragile Section 106 funding actually is. So we can't rely on the situation like that. I can't support this. It's not sustainable. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am mindful that in Medway we have to build 1,675 houses every single year and another 28,500 by 2040. So they have to go somewhere, these houses. It's not easy deciding where those houses have to go. and we have to consider every planning application we receive here on its own merits. And I'm sure most people don't want houses in their own backyard. I'm also mindful that this site isn't in the SLA. It wasn't ever designated to be housing in Cliffe. And I thank both Miss Gunner and the ward councillors for their presentations tonight and their representations. I think the most striking thing for me is we want to increase the size of this village, and let's say it is a village at the end of the B2000 by 25%. And I think, as Councillor Buckwell said, if we could pick a few of these houses and build a few of these houses, I think that would be more acceptable. But increasing a village by 25% is a complete overdevelopment and a complete change of way of life. Now, I don't know Cliffe very well. I live probably the furthest you can get away from Cliffe in Medway. But I do enjoy walking, and I have walked many times out to the Cliffe Forts, through the Cliffe Pools, and down some of these footpaths that you have mentioned in your presentation. And I think it's a lovely location, and it shouldn't be spoiled if we can avoid it. So tonight, I won't be supporting this application either. Thank you.
Councillor Lammas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful for the report, and also to the local ward councillors, Williams, Mrs Turpin, Etheridge, for their very, I think, excellent representation on behalf of their constituents that they represent. I mean, I heard Williams say that they're proposing to move the existing sports facility and create a new one, and that they want to create a new community hub, even though they have a village hall already. I heard Councillor Mrs Turpin talk about how there are no secondary schools that they can walk towards, and she's disputed some of the grading of the land, and we've heard from other colleagues just how valuable this agricultural land will be. And I've heard from Councillor Etheridge of the inadequacy of the local roads there, and how inappropriate it would be to put the extra demand of the traffic. For me, the crucial point is the scale of this development. I am all for sustainable development in the broader region. In fact, I've voted to approve planning previously against some of the representations of some of the ward councillors here this evening. But I cannot in all conscience vote for something that would see a 25% increase in what is a settled community village identity. I think every resident in the whole of Medway deserves to live in an area where they have a settled sense of identity. I think it's extremely important for community relations, and for that reason and that material weight, I will not be supporting the planning application this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else who has indicated. I'm not going to repeat everything that everybody said, but just a couple of things which I think are appropriate. Colleagues will know that this council, and particularly this planning committee, has a very difficult job to do. It is under pressure to deliver housing, much needed housing, for those young people who are still, as I think Councillor Galvin said, still living at home. It has been the aspiration to seek to do as much of that as we possibly can on brownfield sites. Unfortunately, that will never, ever meet the need that we have. So inevitably, there is always going to have to be change. We have all sat here over the last 3-4 years and had to look very closely at sites that we probably would have preferred not to have had to support, but knowing that we do not have a 5-year land supply has always been in the back of our mind, because that puts us at a disadvantage when it comes round to appeals. And you know absolutely for sure that any decision that we make here that a developer does not like will most certainly end up at appeal. Along with Councillor Holcroft-Scott and Councillor Blackwell, I went out to Cliffe, and I have to say that I now understand why, when the original submission to the SLAR came in, that officers looked at it and decided not to include it in what was the emerging local plan. And the more that I walked around Cliffe, the more I felt that that decision was a correct decision. So whether Trenport want to build 250 houses or they wanted to build 500 houses, I do not think that this is an appropriate site for that to happen. I have no further to say, so I will go to the Vice Chairman to move the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members, and for those observing. As stated, it is my constitutional role to put forward the recommendation of approval. That itself is subject to the 106 agreement headings set out at A on our agenda and is subject to conditions 1 to 53 under heading B in the agenda, subject to the amendment to proposed condition 39 thereof. As said, I won't be voting for what I'm proposing, but I propose it. Maybe it won't be seconded, but I propose it.
Is that seconded? For procedural matters, I will second that. Those in favour of that motion?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. That motion fails. I will ask the Vice Chairman if he has a further motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I propose refusal of the Trenport application and suggest that, following the usual protocol, that the formal reasons be considered by the spokespersons. However, Mr. Harris may be able to advise the committee as to certain headings of refusal which might be appropriate. Thank you. I so move refusal.
Yes, I know that's seconded, but we need to know what those reasons are before I can put it to vote.
Chairman, thank you very much. And thank you, Vice Chairman, for asking me to speak on this and to help guide members here. As a number of you have said, if the application is refused, which it will be, then there's likely to be an appeal. I am then required by you as head of planning to defend that appeal. That's fine, that's part of my job. But I've also got to defend every single reason for refusal. So if I can give you a little bit of history here, I have fought an appeal before where there were 5 reasons for refusal. I won the appeal and the appeal was dismissed, but the council still had costs awarded against it because it couldn't properly defend one of those reasons for refusal. Now I say that because I've listened very carefully to the debate tonight, and I think there are a lot of areas there where an argument could be made to defend. However, there are some things that I've heard where we simply could not defend an appeal on that, and we would lose those reasons with costs. So members, if I can, just in terms of what I think are areas that we can consider, and as the Vice Chairman says, we can work on finesse the areas for in terms of that final precise wording. I think members are very clear in terms of the quantum of development that's proposed, that 25%, and that detrimental impact on the character of Cliffe. Comfortable with that, I understand that. I think the other thing which is coming out loud and clear is that you don't consider this to be a sustainable development. That because it is that far down the B2000 and the level of services in that are not in close proximity, that this will be a car-dominated development and therefore not sustainable. So I understand that. There has been lots of talk about the B2000, and I get and I understand, as Councillor Trenter says, yeah, I cycle there. I don't walk, obviously, there's no footpath along the B2000, but I cycle around that area. However, just in terms of the quantum of the additional vehicles, the road, the B2000 highways officer is very clear that the road has capacity for that in terms of the amount of vehicles. So I think listening to your concerns there, it is more related to the residential amenity. It's got to go through the village of Cliffe Woods and partly through the village of Cliffe, that additional development, the additional traffic, so there's an impact on residential amenity. I think there's also the question about the fact, linked to that sustainability point and the fact that it's all car-dominated traffic and the fact that that additional traffic on the B2000 and its narrowness and the lack of a footpath discourages other sustainable forms of transport, like, as Councillor says, the cycling. So that links in, but just in terms of the capacity, the road capacity, it has to have capacity. There's not a severe impact. That's been made very clear to me by our not only the previous highways officer, but the highway consultants that we've now got. And then finally, I think another thing which I've very much picked up from members is about the relocation of the sports ground. What members are saying to us is that sports ground is an asset of community value, and it's in that location, is well overlooked, well used, it's got footpath links to it, and it's safe. What you're saying to me is that relocating it, the proposed relocated site is of inferior quality. You don't consider it to be quite so safe because it's not overlooked. There are not footpath links to it on Buttway Lane. Buttway Lane is a narrow road, and therefore you feel it to be inferior in quality. So again, we can come up with a reason for refusal around that. So those areas, Chairman, I think there are 4 or 5 there. I think we can argue, and I can finesse with officers the final wording of that. The two other areas I would not encourage members to go down. Section 106, you had our viability consultant speak to you last week. In a direct response to a question, he was asked, has he ever done a viability assessment for a greenfield site? The answer was never. Brownfield sites are where the viability issues are. The second thing is in terms of landscape importance, and this relates a little bit to the ones that we considered, or you considered 2 weeks ago. It is an area of local landscape importance, and any development on a greenfield site will cause some harm. But that doesn't mean to say it is unacceptable and should be refused on planning grounds. We as officers consider the scheme for 500 units, and the quantum of that there was a landscape harm. Now reducing to 250 units, and you must consider it at 250 units, irrespective of what you think the developer may do in the future. So you must consider this application. As Hannah said at the beginning, the landscape impacts, there's impacts on views, but the landscape impacts are very localised, and I do not think, and that's the view of our landscape officers as well, that you could justify a reason for refusal on landscape grounds. So members, in briefly summary, highway impact, residential amenity, lack of sustainability, the poor relocation of the sports field, and that harm to the character of the village of Cliffe are the areas I think we can formulate a reason for refusal, or reasons for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
That's very helpful, Mr. Harris. Councillor Buckwell.
Madam Mayor, forgive me, Madam Chairman. For the formality, may I incorporate that summary of reasoning that Mr. Harris has just put and recommended to members as the bases, subject to detail, of the refusal motion which I have proposed. Thank you.
Councillor trying to...
Could I make a brief point, Chair, if that's okay, on this? Just a simple point of clarification. Hopefully, having seen some other appeals go forward, that there'll be nothing on that list, which Mr. Harris very ably explained, that will allow wriggle room, for example, something which I've given an example in the past where public transport hasn't been good enough, and then so they pay for a bus service, and then suddenly the appeal is wins or something. It's very important that these are not areas that an astute lawyer would suddenly think, oh, well, that's okay, we'll do something with the playing area or something like that, and then we'll get it through. From what you said, it'd be very difficult if we win this case, assuming it comes forward on appeal, if we're successful, then it will be sound and we won't be looking at another application. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Councillor Trenton, I absolutely understand what you say. I can't give you an answer which would satisfy you because it would depend on what an inspector says and the conclusions they come to, which is what happened in Cliffe Woods.
Right. It has been moved and seconded, and we now have the reasons. Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. The application, therefore, for the land east and west of Church Street, Cliffe, falls. We will then now take a 5-minute break. If members could please keep it to 5 minutes. members, on to agenda item 6, which is St Nicholas Church of England Voluntary Controlled Infant School, and that's going to be presented by Carly. Oh, sorry, Carly. That was a nice surprise, wasn't it?
Chairman, thank you very much. Members will recall that you considered this, or you had a presentation from me at the last planning committee meeting, and you deferred it to enable a visit to the site to take place, which happened on Saturday. And I think those members attending it found it incredibly useful. It is not an easy application. There are not easy issues that members need to consider. It's going to be a very balanced one. Now, members, let me talk you through it. So you've got Montford Road coming through here. You have the youth centre just there. Car parking areas just in there. This is the school site just in there. And this is where there's proposed a multi-use games area. Now, I don't think any member had an issue with the principle and the need for an extension to this school to provide for a primary accommodation. Now, linked to that, the primary accommodation then brings with it a requirement for more formal play. And that's where the multi-use games area comes in. The reason it's been located in this area here rather than the school grounds, partly because there are some difficulties and some constraints that members saw within the site, but secondly because of the fact that they want to use it for the wider community. Being used by the wider community means it's best located outside of the school site, and then there's that link to the youth club and the use of it here. So just in that area, just there. Now, members, when you went on site, you saw the existing play area in here, and a less formal play area under the trees and the canopy just in there. You also saw in sight this development that's happened here, but also the proximity of these properties here. But this development, Mulderhurren Court, just in there. And the comment that was expressed by those councillors who were around when that permission was granted was they had concerns when that permission was granted, and because of the proximity. And I think in hindsight, they were right. And the reason I say that is because that proximity and the overlooking that members would have seen brings some safeguarding issues into this area. Now, that's not a personal comment about any of the occupants here. It's just saying there is potential safeguarding issues that exist at this moment in time. And as I said, we have a very constrained site. So that's, for those who weren't at the site visit, that's the formal play area coming around here, and then we move to the less formal area under the trees. And then this is the rear garden of Medway Court. And the view that you see from the windows in that, which links to that point I was saying in terms of safeguarding. And then we look at the location of or the potential location of the mugger, the multi-use games area, and the trees that are around there, which are very important. And these are the trees which are proposed to be removed for the games area. So this existing site plan, this is the proposed plan, and this is what members saw when they were on site and the difficulties that they saw. Firstly, in terms of the multi-use games area going in this area here, we looked closely, are there any other locations that it could go? It wouldn't have been acceptable in here. It would have caused some difficulties for the school if it was then open up to the community in terms of security, but then it brings some impact on the amenities of the people who live in this area here. It also, providing for the youth club, a location there. So if it's going in there, where's the recognizing these important trees here, these important trees here, and these important trees around there, where's the best place for it to go? In detailed discussions with my tree officer, and the case officer, it was located there. It does mean that some trees need to go, but we'll be looking for additional tree planting along this area here. In relation to the extension, there was concern, an understandable concern, regarding the impact on the residential amenities of the people living here, because of the proximity and because of the difference in land level. There were considerations as to whether it can move further this way, closer to the school. If we do that, that then leaves a very small constrained play area in here, but still leaves those safeguarding issues that we need to consider. So that was why it was considered to be the most appropriate location, putting it there with that link through to the school. But we must recognise that impact on residential amenity. So what is the most appropriate solution? And that's something members that you will consider. In terms of trees, this shows the trees which are protected by tree preservation order. Now on site, members, you were asking about which trees are protected, and the agent, I think, misunderstood the question, because what he was explaining was the trees that they're looking to retain, those in there, which are not protected by tree preservation order, but they are looking to retain, and indeed provide, I think it was Councillor Curry that made the point to me actually, which was in terms of children out playing, that trees there will help to provide shelter, help to provide an amenity for them. And I think that was a really good point. And that's why it's important, despite the quality, and I bow to Councillor Curry's point in terms of the quality of these trees here. That's why we feel that retaining that as it exists, but having the extension down here. As you see, there will be a need to remove 3 trees in that area there. And then we are looking for some additional tree planting along there, and then maybe some additional tree planting within the car parking area or around the car parking area. Then the question that members raised was, okay, if we put aside for 1 second whether we think that this is the right location for the extension, is it the right design? Is there a design that can come up with which limits the impact on neighbouring residents? The original design was a pitch roof, as you see here. So that's the boundary fence. This is Modern Court, and you can see the proximity there. So originally it's proposed to be with a pitched roof. There was concerns at that, so it was then changed to a flat roof that you see there. Now, members pointed out that in terms of the ridge level, that's actually higher than the eaves level of the pitch roof. So is it actually any better in terms of impact on the neighbouring properties? Talking that through over the last few days with the agent and the education authority, what they could do, and if members are happy with this, you'd need to grant me delegated authority to agree this, what they could do is reduce the height of that flat roof by removing the green roof. That would enable them to reduce the height of it, and also means that they don't have to have the railings around the top. So that would enable the height to come down. Now, if members were to accept the principle of the extension in that location, for the reasons that I've said, providing the separate play area here and here, but bringing in some safeguarding, and you feel that a flat roof could potentially be better than the ridge roof, but you want it brought down, then you could give me delegated authority to negotiate that alteration. But members, that's where we are in terms of that. The only other thing I would say is condition 19 on your agenda is actually a duplication of condition 7. So if you do approve that, I'll ask you to remove condition 19. And subject to everything I've said, Chairman, recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Councillor Van Dyke wishes to address you as a local member. Do you agree? Thank you. Councillor Van Dyke, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Well, that last comment kind of changes this to a certain extent, but I am speaking against the application with an emphasis, as it currently stands, with emphasis on the paperwork in front of us to extend the school due to the significant detrimental impact on residents of Maduran Court, and in particular the owner-occupiers of 11 Maduran Court. Whilst a number of iterations of the application have been put forward, residents had not been appraised for the reasons to site the new build just 6 feet from the residential properties rather than on the opposite side of the current school building, with minor adjustment to the proposed placement of the mugger. This would entirely mitigate potential overshadowing of the residential properties affected, as well as excessive noise. On the site visit on the 15th of October, we heard that this had been considered by the architects, but ruled out due to a movement of pupils from the existing building to the new build for certain activities, a walk of probably only a minute or two for those children. In the alternative, members have suggested it may well be possible for the new build to be placed adjacent and in front of the existing classrooms, creating a greater space between it and the residential buildings. And although the proposal now is to lower the height of the flat roof, I'm concerned that no overshadowing assessment has been carried out other than by the owners of 11 Maduran Court in respect of any of the iterations offered, taking into consideration observations and recording of the angle of light into the affected residences at various times of day. This is compounded by obstruction of light at the front of number 11 due to the presence of a very large protected tree. And the effect can, as members who visited will testify, can only be truly appreciated by a direct observation from within the residential property, which is comparable to a dungeon-like experience. The introduction in the third iteration of the design of a flat green roof, whilst preferable in a climate change context, as it stood at the higher level, increases the amount of light deprivation due to the proposed design being even higher than the earlier pitched roof plans. And I'm unclear as to what the impact will be when that roof is lowered. I don't know what the reduction in height is. In respect of all of the various proposals, direct observation shows that the properties are likely to suffer detrimental loss of light in premises that are already very dark in the main living areas, and further will impede privacy and the right to quiet enjoyment of their property. These residents believe they will inevitably suffer noise pollution from the proposed plant room, which will appear to be directly facing bedroom and living areas, as well as from the proposed new classrooms, again in the region of only 6 feet from their properties, especially during summer months when they have their windows open, both at night as well as during the day. And the residents of number 11 work principally from home. To be clear, these residents are seeking reasonable and appropriate amendments to the plan, as opposed to an outright rejection of an application to extend the school to accommodate much-needed pupil capacity. And they're asking members to reject the plan as it currently stands. And I'm concerned that we don't necessarily appreciate the impact of this reduction of the height of the flat roof. And would suggest that there are alternative ways of extending this school accommodation on site that will not have a detrimental impact on the adjacent properties.
Thank you. Right. Okay. I saw Councillor Thorne, Hubbard, and right. Thorne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Like a lot of my colleagues here, I went to the site visit on Saturday and was very pleased that I did, actually, because it quite opened my eyes up to what was going on. I queried the nature of where the extension was going to be in the first place, and wondered why it couldn't be moved adjacent to the actual school itself, and was informed on site by the agent that if they moved the building over, it would stop the light going into the hall. So it seemed quite appropriate that it's okay to stop the light going, have the light going into the hall, but it's okay to not have light going into the houses at the back of it. So I thought that was rather selfish in its own little way. I later found out that, from what Dave's just said, in hindsight, when the application for the houses was first brought in, members queried the safeguarding issues with the house overlooking the school. I'm really concerned now that 19 years later, hindsight comes in and they're thinking, oh, no, we have got a safeguarding issue. This should have been thought out 19 years ago. So I'm not particularly pleased about the way that is. As to the extension being proposed, I don't think any member here is against an extension on the school. We want to see the school thrive. We want to see the school survive and prosper. It's one of the best schools in Strood, and it should be seen as being so. But we have to consider the residents, and we also have to consider the school itself. So I just don't think at the moment, and I haven't made my mind up yet, that this is the correct option for the extension to be done.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. Yes, and I was one of those members back in 2003 that raised concerns about the site, which was the hotel, and it was two issues there. One was overlooking a safeguarding issue, but the other one was that there was too many units being put onto the former hotel grounds. It could have got away with a lot less, and I've told the developer on numerous occasions since that I felt it was the wrong thing. And I know the developer very well, since they run the local chemist. Right, I found this site visit very useful. I thought I knew the site very well, but what I didn't appreciate was the view that came from the back of number 11. First of all, it's the fact that it's a very tight little sort of, well, it's not even a yard, is it? It's a small space, nicely put together, but it's small. And you go up to the first floor, and it's their kitchen, and they overlook the school and into the playground and into the school itself. So when the planning application came forward, I looked at the detailed drawings, and the one that was critical to me was the one that showed the existing roof. That was the first version, the pitched roof, and the pitched roof kept on going down. And it showed that, if you stuck to the pitch roof, the actual impact upon number 11 was minimal, in the sense that you wouldn't have additional loss of light into the back of their property, because the back of the property is a wall and a fence, and the pitch of the roof wouldn't actually be anything more than the existing height of the fence. Then they've come forward with a flat roof, which actually makes things worse for the people at number 11. It now means that there is now, halfway up the window on the first floor, a loss of light. So I'm not quite sure why we went for a flat roof. It's green to look at, but it's actually causing an issue for the people at number 11. And apart from that, when I talked to the architect, I said, why hadn't you considered actually the building on the other side of the school, on top of the footpath that goes down to the gate onto London Road? And I was expecting him to say, it was, on geology terms, it's the slope. And he was saying, actually, well, it was due to the fact of some trees, and due to the factory circulation and how the school could operate with the building being on the opposite side. So I wondered how, and that was rejected. And we didn't reject it. They weren't rejecting the idea of the impact upon residents living nearby. I should say that I want this development extension to the school to happen. It's been delayed. And why has it been delayed? We all know about the bulge classes for the Rainham Secondary School. And what does that mean? We had to fund it, that's the Medway Council out of its fund from the Department of Education, which meant that the money that was earmarked to go towards St Nicholas School's extension didn't come, and we had to play around trying to find the money to actually allow that extension to happen. So it wasn't so much COVID ended up in delaying this extension to be built. In fact, it was the funding that had to go elsewhere to pay for something that wasn't our fault, the reason for this delay of the school being built over in Rainham. So I want the school to have its extension, and I've told the head that as well, who I've known for some years because she was the deputy head. But I found myself thinking, I can't really support where this building's going. Not with a flat roof, that's for sure. If it was the pitch, I would have started to be a little bit more comfortable. But I would have liked to have seen another proposal to come along when you actually throw the extension the other side, you put the multi-games area on to the north of the existing playground, and I would think that's a better solution. So I found myself torn between wanting to support it and find myself maybe not wanting to support it.
Councillor Trenter.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's not very often I feel outraged by something here, but I'm afraid I'm outraged by one of the suggestions. And I didn't know until today that this issue of safeguarding was going to be raised. Councillor Howcroft-Scott, may have very appropriately said that this is the wrong place to build these houses, but nevertheless they were built. And across Medway, and indeed across the country, there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of examples for historic reasons of a home or a window or a part of something overlooking an area where children happen to play, and so on. And my own home, I will admit, is one of those. In my case, my house was built before the school. But and it's in a conservation area, so there's probably little chance of anyone's going to build a wall or something to, prevent someone looking out the window of my home at where children happen to be. I don't think, whilst we might, when building a new school, take all these issues into account, I think it's outrageous to then suddenly be effectively saying to residents, we now think you're a danger to these children, and we're going to put something in the way so that you can't see them. That's a terrible thing to say to people. I mean, how can we possibly even think such a thing? That is not how we operate in this country. I think it's wrong that that should ever have even been said. I couldn't understand, like my colleague Councillor Thorne, why the building was in that position. And I was shocked to hear, it's because the light would affect the school if it was that side, but it wouldn't, it didn't matter if it affected the poor residents the other side. So I have serious misgivings. My suggestion, subject to advice, would be not to decline, but to defer, to allow the architects to think again, possibly come back with another idea, maybe something with a pitched roof, which might look nicer, so that, somebody looking out their window would see a slightly more attractive. I think flat roofs are not quite as nice. And it was such a delightful school, and it's such a lovely area with the trees and everything around it was beautiful. So I think someone needs to go back and think again on this. And please, let us not start the precedent of suddenly saying anyone that lives near a school is somehow a danger to those children, just because that's how it is. I mean, we might build new schools differently, but we are where we are. And I don't think we could start that precedent. Otherwise, we'll be building walls and screens and trees and buildings all across the land to stop someone looking at children, at play or whatever it is that they're up to. I don't think we should be thinking like that retrospectively. So I think I shall listen to what colleagues are going to say, but be guided by the Vice Chairman, but I think possibly moving a deferment to allow the architects to think again and think again quickly, because I get the impression, and I agree with colleagues, that this development is needed for the school. We want to see that happen, but we want to see it in a way which is sensitive for the neighbours. Thank you.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. It might be helpful, if you don't mind, Mr. Harris, if you could pull up the aerial photograph of the site, just to, so I can make my points, if I may. That's good, thank you. I just wanted to pick up 2 points that have already been touched on. One is the safeguarding issue. Again, I find that quite an unusual situation. It could have been resolved by a slightly higher fence, frankly, many, many years ago, and it hasn't been, and then now it's an issue, which actually, if it is a safeguarding issue, why wasn't it dealt with previously? So I've got a problem with that. And I appreciate Mr. Harris's point about coming back with delegated authority on the roof, but actually we've had 3 roof iterations on this now. We had a pitched roof, a flat roof with biodiversity interest, and now we've got a lower flat roof. And I think that's pushing the boundaries of where this committee needs to make a decision rather than it being a delegated one. So I think my feeling is that that shouldn't be delegated. It's up to us to make our minds up what we want on that one. So that's just a point there. And then moving on from those 2 points to the issue of the location of the thing. Like my colleagues, I'm a little bit surprised it's going where it is. It seems a very awkward site to build on, a very cramped site. It makes the playground, it compromises the amount of playground that's available to the children, which is at a premium. And I believe there's probably just as much room on the other side, as my colleague Councillor Hubbard was saying, to get what they want in there in a more compact and perhaps a better, perhaps even cheaper, because if they're building an extension or whatever on the side. So that I feel that they need to be looking again at the location of the building itself. And then finally the point on the trees. Though if you look to the left of the existing school building, there's a block of trees in the middle of the field there, that block there. I mean, we had a good look at those trees. They're lovely trees. And it would be really quite awful to see them go. They do provide a very important ecosystem service, as the tree officer constantly refers to. We had 40-degree heat this last summer. That's where the children will be in playtime when it's that hot. And they need those trees to be retained, in my feeling. And actually, if the opportunity arises, more trees on site. So the size and location of the multi-use games area is also a problem for me as well. I think perhaps they should be looking at how they can provide multi-use games without having to take out really quite important trees. So I've got a problem on a number of levels with this. The idea of deferral sounds sensible. Either that or, depending on the advice that we get from officers, we refuse and look at a new scheme. The principle of the development is fine. I'm absolutely in favour of that, but I just think the design needs another look. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Holcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think we need to defer this. There is just such a vast amount of land there that is not utilised, and to lose 3 trees, you know, in a climate change crisis is terrible. But also, the architects and the head teacher will be walking children out in all weathers with no walkway or cover to the Muggle as well. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I really am grateful to both Councillor Buckwell and Councillor Fawn, who assisted me with my mobility issues down the slope. But it looked to me that when we got outside the building, there's quite a lot of land available at the front of the school, which is not overlooking anybody. And I just wondered why perhaps that hadn't been considered by the architects. But looking at this, I don't think this is fit for purpose. I'm a great champion of the school. You know, I was deputy at the school round the road, and one of my really good lifelong friends was the head that managed to get the school outstanding in 2013. I'm glad it's going to be a through primary. I think it's really important for Strood to have a successful school, and also, you know, a church school from the ages of 4 to 11. I'm sad it's taken so long, but if it's not fit for purpose, we need to defer it and get something that is.
Councillor Buckwell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with all previous speakers on this. 6 of us here tonight were there and were very pleased and interested to be there on Saturday morning with Mr. Harris. but there is so much of this application as it stands that is muddled. And frankly, as every member who was there on Saturday has said this evening, there are so many aspects of this application that need revisiting by the applicants. And the architect was not able to deal with those issues on site. Now, I understand this needs a complete rethink, in my opinion. So, in brief, for those reasons, if Councillor Tranter is proposing deferral tonight, I fully support it, and I know that there are some funding issues. But please, let this application not be readjusted in part and in a rush, because every point that members have made tonight needs to be looked at by the applicants, because I think every point made is utterly valid. Thank you. So I will support deferral, and I'm happy to second that.
Councillor Thorne.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back. I do remember on Saturday that there was a bit of a query as to whether the land where the mugger was going to be put is wholly owned by the school or whether it's partly owned by the school and partly owned by the youth centre. Could Dave advise us on that, please?
Chairman, it's a difficult one because the actual, it's all owned by the council, but the school part is this bit here, which they work on, and then the youth centre is this wider area here. Now, the reason for putting the mugger there is so it can be used by the school during school time, and then the youth centre outside of that time. Can I just say that I would prefer a deferral to a refusal, partly because of the funding reasons that Councillor Buckwell says.
Right, but it's... sorry, did you wish to speak? Sorry, Councillor Galvin.
Yes, I do. I can confirm that all the land round there is in the council's ownership, which comes under my portfolio, and should a reasonable suggestion as to a reallocation of the land to make the school premises more acceptable, I would be very happy wearing my property portfolio hat to look at that, because I think every member that's spoken has said the school's a good school. It's something we want in that part of Strood, and I think it's up to us to find a scheme that's workable and acceptable. And certainly, I will talk tomorrow with our property guys and see if we can, what we can do to make it work. I mean, as it's all in the council's ownership, I can't see any reason why we can't look at a reasonable proposal.
Right, it has been moved and it has been seconded that this application is deferred. Those in favour?
That's 13, Chairman.
Those to there's one missing. Two missing.
Two missing.
Thank you. Right, that item is deferred. Could somebody kindly tell Mrs. Griffin? We can move on then. Right, everybody's back, so we go on to the Kingdom Hall, Bloors Lane, Rainham, and that is going to be Carly.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is for the construction of 23-bed houses. Gone a bit too far there, sorry. So this is the application site here. It's the urban area of Rainham, with residential surrounding and a school across the road. So in terms of the principle of residential in a residential area, there's no objection from officers. Members will be aware of the planning history, or some of you at least will be. There's quite a lengthy history on this site. I will pause on this slide just to go through some of that before moving on to the main presentation. But this is an aerial photograph of the site outlined in red with the Kingdom Hall here. Just a point of clarification in terms of the site area that's contained in the report. The area is 0.5 hectares, providing a density of 40 dwellings per hectare. The report states an area of 0.8 hectares. And just to explain where the mistake arose, there was a previous application from last year that included the Kingdom Hall area, which is this area here roughly. That was originally submitted for residential in this portion and a reconfigured car parking area and provision of more spaces. What the applicant chose to do was to separate out the two applications, so made a separate application for the car parking area to relate to the Kingdom Hall, and produced a new red line for just the residential. And what happened was the site area wasn't then amended in the previous committee report, and that's been carried through into this one. But what I can say in terms of that previous application, it was reported to members, the measurements in terms of the dwellings on the site and in relation to the properties that were measured by officers was correct. And you could see the spatial layout, so in terms of officers' recommendation, that wouldn't have changed. So you can see just here the school opposite on Bloors Lane, and then the surrounding residential area, and as mentioned, the Kingdom Hall. There has previously also been a historic application for a 40-bed care home that was somewhere in this area, where there are plans coming up on the slides. And for 13 dwellings. This was back in 1998, and because of the construction of the Kingdom Hall here, this application, that planning permission was implemented, so remains extant. So that means effectively a care home and 13 dwellings could be built. There was then subsequently another application which amended that permission, but it was a permission in its own right, as I understand, that was determined on the 6th of August in 2001, which deleted 4 of the 13 houses from that original proposal and then changed some of that area to amenity land and to car parking at the front. This doesn't then supersede the other one. They're 2 permissions. So that's the history of the site in a nutshell, which is the 2001 is missing from the list in the report. But the 1998 one is there. So this is just some photographs showing the entrance into the site from Bloors Lane, and then from inside the site looking back towards Bloors Lane with the properties there, and then within the site looking northwest towards properties on Bloors Lane and Penshurst Close. Ooh. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. Sorry, to make sure I'm going the right way. And then within the site, towards the rear, and these are the properties, the backs of the properties in Penshurst Close and Kingdom Hall. And then this is the area of land where there's now planning permission for a car park associated with the Kingdom Hall. And then this is within the site looking at the rear of properties to the northeast in Pembroke Way. So just off the picture is that car parking area. And then within the site, looking back towards Bloors Lane, standing from where that new car parking area would be, and back towards Bloors Lane. So this is the previous permission from 1998. So that's for the care home, the Kingdom Hall, and the 13 houses. So the houses here, care home here, Kingdom Hall, and that's the elevations for the care home. And then this is the revised scheme of that reference, so it shows 9 properties. These were all slides that were shown previously to the committee last year. So moving on to the current proposal and the one that we granted last year. So this is the proposal last year, and this is the current proposal, so the layout of both, so you can see them side by side. What you can see there is similar arrangement in terms of the road running through from Bloors Lane into the site. This is the Kingdom Hall here and the parking area here. So this was the previous proposal, and one of the main things is you see these buildings are curved to the front of the site. We've got different orientation, different types of dwellings here. There's visitors parking along the road here, similar to the previous proposal, and we have landscaping retained to the front. There's also a difference in terms of the parking arrangement. So on this application here, it was parking to the sides of the dwellings in a tandem arrangement, so one behind the other. Whereas here we've got some to the sides, but we've also got parking to the front, which means the spaces are slightly larger and therefore a bit more user-friendly. In terms of the parking standards, it does meet our, the parking provision does meet our standards, and in terms of the plot depths, they do all meet. There's a provision of at least 10 metres for each property. And in terms of the arrangement with the neighbouring properties, the distances have been measured between the proposed properties and the closest, and all of the properties along here, but in terms of the closest one, I believe it's a 10-metre gap between the side and the rear extension of the property here. That's the closest arrangement in terms of the proposal with the neighbouring properties, but it's a side facing rear arrangement there. Officers consider that to be an acceptable arrangement throughout the layout and not result in an adverse impact to existing residents. In terms of the trees, the larger trees shown on the plan are to be retained and all others are to be removed in the same way to the previous proposal that was granted. And in terms of consideration with the council officer, tree officer, there's no objection raised in that regard because there is a condition for some replacement planting. The previously approved properties were two-storey in terms of height, but within, I suppose it's 2.5 with the accommodation in the roof space, and we have a similar arrangement here, so accommodation in the roof space, but some different roof designs. These are all shown as gable, or it's got some barn hips here. And in terms of the heights and architecture, again, there's no objection from officers in that regard. So just run through some elevations and floor plans of the development for the different plots. The next one. In terms of the internal space standards, all the dwellings comply with the national standards, and conditions are recommended for noise mitigation measures in relation to noise generated by the use of the Kingdom Hall and securing a precautionary approach to ecology, provision of SUDs and for gas protection measures. These are all similar to the conditions that were placed on the 2021 permission, and Section 106 contributions and bird mitigation contributions will be secured for a Section 106. I think it's important to be clear that officers have considered the current proposal in the context of current planning policy, but that, to point out, relevant history is a material consideration. So we do have to take account of that. So subject to completion of the Section 106 and conditions set out in the report, we are recommending it for approval. Thank you.
Councillor Brown wishes to address you. Do you agree? Councillor Brown, you have 5 minutes.
Excuse me, Chair. I have a question before we spend any more time on this. This application is subject to a complaint to the local government ombudsman, And I'm wondering, do we have the legal authority to find on it while it's subject to that complaint?
I don't know the answer, but I think that it will not stop that complaint progressing because there is already a live permission.
Chairman, thank you very much. All I can say in response to that, members, is that the complaint to the Ombudsman is in relation to the process that we would have gone through in terms of this application or previous applications. We've responded through stage 1, stage 2, and we're satisfied from an officer point of view, myself and the Chief Executive section, that we have followed proper process. If I thought that we hadn't, then I wouldn't have allowed that application to have come before this committee.
Would you like to go ahead?
I take it that we have legal permission to go ahead then. I'm going to read a statement from my residents about this, but before I do that, with way of introduction, I am very surprised that there's a number of trees being removed from this site and that are mature trees. And when you debated all your previous submissions, you recognise the value of mature trees. There's nothing that actually says that these are going to be replaced by anything meeting that. So leaving that aside, and the 106 money, which I'm sure that many of the members here tonight will be a bit concerned about, how it's chunked up and not necessarily with that's going to benefit the immediate area, except from the Pelican Crossing. So I'm going to read this statement now from my residents. Dear members, for the sake of democracy, fairness and integrity, we as residents rely on the details of the development to be presented honestly and accurately. A lot of important information and comments were simply omitted from the 20-page report supplied for this meeting. Medway Council accepted that the Senior Planning Officer, Ms Mead, failed to communicate with the neighbouring residents throughout the planning process, and that the Council's ICT failure led to residents being excluded from the tracker and unable to attend the committee meeting on the 18th of August, when the original application was heard under MC 2696. The drawing provided with the agenda under PDF 388 KB is a true representation of the actual site. And I'm glad to have heard the clarification that the size of the site is actually 0.5, well, rounded up from 4882. So that error, thankfully, has been highlighted. There was never approval for a 40-bed care home and 13-by-3-bed terrace on this site. I see that you do make reference to that. But the reliance on previously approved planning applications was to unduly influence the planning committee and was plainly wrong and inaccurate. This is not my words. A care home was never going to be built on the site, as it was built on the site which is now the car park for the Kingdom Hall and not part of the site application. The car park for 75 spaces was passed under MC 210112, but has around 50 spaces, making it over a third smaller, and the overflow continues into the development site and Bloors Lane. The development site is said to have 2-storey homes, which in fact are 3 stories. Our homes on Pembroke Way and Mayfield are to the north of the site and on lower ground, and the 3rd-storey homes will be taller and make our homes subservient, which goes against BRE guidelines. A BRE assessment was not completed by the council or development, and had it been, would show 9 Mayfield Close being particularly affected due to the huge wall which will take away a considerable amount of natural light and sunlight. We, the residents, feel that the development has not been well thought out, is too big for the small area of land, and goes against Medway's local plan. The additional words that residents want me to stress is they feel this is overdevelopment of this site. Overcrowding, it's overbearing, and it doesn't help at all that we have ignored the climate crisis and the ecology on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Members.
Hello, members. Sorry for not answering the question before, but I've done a quick search. Even though there's an ombudsman complaint, that doesn't stop the council from proceeding with normal decision-making procedures in their normal way.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Prenter. Councillor Prenter.
Thank you, Chair. This site has been fraught with disaster from whenever they've tried developing it, with subsidence, buildings being built, being pulled down, etc. in the past, care homes being proposed and changed again. I know we've got a live application there, and you say it's only a small amendment, but when we look at them curved buildings on both them corners, they're actually being squared up now, right up to that boundary fence of them residents on both sides. That's going to have a detrimental effect on them residents that live in them houses. I personally think it is overdeveloped, hence they're trying to squeeze in them houses right on them corners, right up to them residents that live in them houses. They are of a higher level, that was Councillor Brown did mention. That will be looking out your back window up to a brick wall right outside your house. This is overdevelopment. It shouldn't have gone through the first time, and I don't believe we should allow this amendment this time that impacts more on them residents again. Thank you.
Councillor Holcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I totally agree with what's been said from Councillor Brown and Councillor Tranter. And also, I found it really difficult to read the paperwork because I understand that there seems to be some discrepancies in there. It is an overdevelopment. I feel that it will be negative for the community, and also, you know, I have to say that if you look at the transport facilities and all the development in that area, it's just too much in such a small space. So for that, I cannot support the development.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I've got one question. Is this a greenfield or a brownfield site? Is my question there, which you can answer in a moment. And my other points about this is that I'm uncomfortable, a little bit like the school application we've just looked at as well. I'm uncomfortable about the fact that there doesn't seem to be enough thought gone into this and how it's working. I mean, at one point, there is a question mark over some legality issues, which I would feel more comfortable if they were resolved first. I appreciate we don't have to, but I would feel more comfortable. So that's another factor in my mind about this. There is no mention, I appreciate there's some effort towards the climate change agenda, but I mean, where are the ground source or air source heat pumps? Why are we still relying on gas supplies to these houses? The issue about the removal of mature trees is a concern as well. So I'm sort of building up a number of points here of sort of minor concern, but accumulation. And then I'm looking at 20 houses in a space like this, and I feel, again, that's another quite strong factor. So I think this is overdevelopment and perhaps even infill to a certain extent. So I would be not supporting this application. Thank you, Chair.
I don't have anybody else who's indicated. I'm probably along with Councillor Tranter, the only members who actually recall the site visit. If my memory serves me well, this site was many years ago, either it was or is adjacent to what was a landfill site. So whether that concludes that it's brownfield or greenfield, I'm not sure, but that's what it was. What members do have to take into consideration is whether we like it or we don't like it. There is still an extant planning permission, which means that the Kingdom Hall could continue and build the care home. Is that right?
Yes, they could.
Yeah. Okay.
We can't say whether they intend to or not. I suspect not, but yeah.
I do appreciate that, but it is still extant, so it could happen at some point. It may never do. The other thing which is relevant is that last year we approved on this site an application for a similar number of properties. I'm not quite sure how you can now refuse it on the basis that it's an overdevelopment of the site when you have just, or when a previous committee meeting a year ago actually approved something similar in relation to volume. So members have to grapple with that particular issue, but I can't see how it can be defended on an overdevelopment of the site. I don't have... Yes, did you wish to come back?
Chairman, I just wish to answer Councillor Curry's question on whether it's brownfield or greenfield. And I'm going to show my age here a little bit, Simon. My recollection, and the Chairman's got a much better memory than me, my recollection is that it was a landfill site and that there was a development on it, which then there was subsidence and those buildings were taken down. So on that basis, I think it's a brownfield site, if that's it.
Councillor Curry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that response. And that raises another flag about subsidence and stuff like that. Are we sure this is a safe place to be building houses? Has the appropriate groundwork been done?
I would suspect since that happened, a lot of technology has come into place to change those sorts of things. I have nobody else who's indicated. Councillor Buckwell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Colleagues, I move the officer recommendation of approval, which is subject to 106 terms and also to conditions 1 to 21 set out and concluding on page 91 of this agenda item. So moved.
Sorry, Councillor.
Can I just add, depending on what the decision is, can we also add exactly what Councillor Brown said around the 106 and for a discussion to be had with the local councillors there regarding that?
Yes.
Madam Chairman, I'm happy to incorporate that suggestion. There's no adverse officer reaction to that, apparently. No, that's acceptable, officer. So I would specifically incorporate Councillor MacDonald's comments.
Okay. Is that acceptable, Councillor Thorne? Those in favour?
That's 10, Chairman.
Those to the contrary?
That's 5, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for the Kingdom Hall succeeds. That takes us then to agenda item 8, which is land at Lennoxwood. And in this instance, Councillor Prenter wishes to address you as the ward member. Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is for the construction of 19 houses along with access and parking, and it's a mix of terraces, semi-detached and detached dwellings. So this is the site here outlined in red. It's an urban area of Twydall, and again, as you can see, there's quite a lot of residential surrounding the site. So again, no objection to the principle of residential in this locality. So this is looking from Petham Green towards the middle of the site. And then we have the relationship with the bungalows on Petham Green, so some Harris fencing along the front there. And then looking towards the back of the site. And then to looking back towards the back of the site, and we've got the adjacent property, number 11 Newnham Close there. And then just step into the side of the boundary with Newnham Close. That's the property there that we've just seen in the other picture. and then looking back along sort of the front, along Petham Green, standing in front of the property we've just seen, and then there's some stairs up, so you can see there are some changes in land levels. And then looking from Petham Green into the site just towards Newnham Close. So this is the layout of the previously approved application. So the previous outline was allowed appeal, and then we had the reserved matters application that we approved, and this was the previously approved layout. And then we've got the current scheme on the right here. So you can see in terms of the road into the site, that's pretty much the same sort of arrangement. But this current layout, we've got the properties all fronting into the site, whereas this arrangement here is quite different in terms of the layout. We've got the properties fronting out onto Petham Green, so we've got a lot of backs of property here and sides fronting into the site itself. So this is considered to be an improvement on that layout, creating a nice active frontage within the middle, and it also allows for more landscaping. Not a huge amount, I have to say, but more landscaping within the front area and parking there. So again, not ideal in terms of parking fronting in the whole of the site, but it needs to be accommodated and is considered to be an improvement on this arrangement here. So in terms of layout, no objection from officers in that regard. The parking is compliant all but one, so we're missing one visitor space, and we do not consider it to be unacceptable in that regard. The plots would have a garden depth of a minimum of 7 metres, which is compliant with the Medway housing design standards. And in terms of the arrangement with the adjacent properties, again, no objection. The relationship with the neighbouring properties is considered acceptable by officers. There is a close relationship here with this property, with the backs facing over the rear garden area of Newnham Close. But what we've done is included a condition to secure directional windows at first floor level. So they're those sort of triangular windows you see that could be obscure glazed on one side and clear glazed another, so you direct the outlook across this way rather than into the rear of the property here. And then moving on to what they'll look like. So 2-storey properties with gable ends. There are a few, is a change in land level across the site, so you can see some of them appear as single-storey to the front, but 2-storey to the rear, but with some accommodation in the roof space for some of them. Again, no objection in terms of the design of the properties from an officer's point of view. And then we've got some CGIs coming up to give you an idea of what they might look like and a feel for them. So that's one of the single-storey front elevations, and sort of drops to 2-storey to the rear. And all of these properties are compliant with the space standards. So in terms of officer recommendation, we've included conditions for ecological mitigation, biodiversity enhancement, landscaping, including tree protection measures and replacement trees, and provision of SUDs. There's Section 106 contributions and bird mitigation contributions, as you'd expect, and that would be secured by a Section 106. So subject to those Section 106 requests and conditions set out in the report, we're recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Colleagues, Councillor Prenter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually quite torn on this site. It ticks all the boxes. It's a brownfield site. It should have been developed before children's play areas and Twydalls were bulldozed out. However, my concern is we had a good opportunity here. You have Petham Green, which is an elderly residential bungalow set up is to put bungalows at that top and level it through, because it is actually the highest part of the site, so it would have actually sat nicely with the changing of the land. However, I welcome that the social housing, we need the social housing. But again, I do feel that this was a missed opportunity to provide more bungalow accommodation, which is needed in Twydall, for people to downsize, the elderly to downsize, which they want to do, and then free up other housing across the estate. Again, I'm torn. I don't know which way to go with this, because I do support everything else about it. Brownfield site, more social housing, but again, it was a lost opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. I support this application. I think from the CGIs and the plans, it looks good. It's well in a residential area of Twydall. As Councillor Prentice says, it's some more social housing that we desperately need. In Medway. And we, just like the last application, we did have a prior approved application. So if we refuse this, we're likely to lose it on appeal. And I think that's an important point to consider. So I'll be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
As much as I've in the past been very much in favour of building bungalows, when I look at the proposal and see the types of houses that are there, 10 two-bedroom, 7 three-bedroom, 1 4-bedroom, and 1 6-bedroom dwelling. I think that is trying to meet a wide range of needs that is obviously required within the housing revenue account. I mean, one of the criticisms that's been made of a lot of our affordable housing is that so much of it is flatted accommodation and not suitable for families. This is going to provide good quality family accommodation on a brownfield site. So really, we should all be welcoming this.
I have nobody else who's indicated. Sorry, I don't see leftways.
Chairman, thank you. Just wanted to come in because I recognise totally Councillor Prentice's point about bungalows. And it's really just to point out that literally up the road, the HRA team did provide some additional bungalows just up the road. So it's just trying to provide that mix.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make,
sorry.
Seem to have made a mistake here. The actual development tracks a demand for 38 parking spaces, but the applicant's providing 40, so there's not a shortfall. In fact, they're providing 2 parking spaces more than your standard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As has been said, it's a balance. Do we do more bungalows or do we go with family homes? Members have to make a judgment. Councillor Buckwell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I appreciate the comments all members have made, including Councillor Prenter as well. And it's good to hear about a development that actually, from the outset, would appear to have sufficient parking. I think we should particularly welcome that. So all of that said, I'm pleased to move the officer recommendation to approve the scheme, that being subject to a 106 agreement and to conditions 1 to 24, which run up to page 113 on the agenda. So moved.
Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for land at Lennoxwood succeeds. The application number 9 is for 24 Gun Lane, Strood. Mr. Harris.
Chairman, thank you very much. Members, 24 Gun Lane, similar to the last 2 applications, this site also has a planning history. This is the application site just in here. So we've got flats next door. It's within the main urban area of Strood. And certainly Councillor Hubbard will remember the Tug and Shovel pub that used to be next door, which has now been demolished. Before I go on, members, just pointing out some things which I should have put on the supplementary agenda advice. Condition 27, which talks about the commercial units. There's a word "not" missing. So it should say the ground floor commercial units of the development hereby permitted shall exclude any use not falling within subcategory A, because we want this to be a retail use, not an industrial use or other uses that fall within class E. We also need an additional condition regarding obscure glazing. So the additional condition 28 regarding obscure glazing, it's referred to in the report that the side windows I show should be obscure glass. So moving on, members, this is the application side here. Again, for a lot of members like myself will remember that there used to be a dance studio, kids dance studio on this, which has been demolished, and you can see the flats that are next door just there. And then this is looking at the site, and the adjacent site, tug and shovel site, is just to the left there. And this is to the rear, so we're within the site here, looking back towards Strood, and you can see the adjacent block of flats there, 5 stories in height. And again, that's where the tug and shovel was, just in there, and the Working Men's Club just over the road. So proposed layout. So you can see that the access is off of Gun Lane, 4 car parking spaces in there, and then the block sited in here. That's that adjacent block of flats there, and then the flats that I've showed at the back. Just want to go back one if I can. Oh, it's not shown in the photograph. I thought there was a better photograph. Apologies. So this shows the previously approved scheme. So that's the frontage onto Gun Lane. 4 stories there with commercial on the ground floor. Now that previous approval was for 8 units, and this application is for 13 units with 2 commercial. And then at the back, because you've got this difference in site levels, the back is higher. So this scheme is providing an additional block at the top to provide for additional units, but it is, as you can see, set back slightly to provide that articulation and reduce the impact of that additional height. And then you can see the elevations closer up. And then this is the photo I was looking to see. So you'll see that adjacent block is 5 stories. It's 4 stories there, but that's because you've got this slope up to the entrance. But if you actually take the floor level through here, then it's 5 stories. And that's why when you look at this plan, which shows the height in relationship to those, you can see the proposal is marginally higher than that, but you then have that setback. So in terms of floor layout, on the lower ground floor, because as I said, you've got that slope down, you've got the refuse, you've got the cycle store at the front, and then at the back you've got these 2 units in here. Now members, in terms of the boundary treatment condition, what we will need to look at very carefully is some boundary treatment around here to provide some protection to the amenity of the prospective residents in there, because that will be one of the entrances to the block, and we need to protect their amenity. Then we have the 2 commercial units on the ground floor, and then above we've got 3 units on each floor, going up to the 4th floor when there are 2 units. So the additional units are created by the fact that the previous approval only had 2 units, it falls 1 to 3, and then didn't provide for any units within. It didn't have a 4th floor, so that's where the difference comes. In terms of internal amenity, they all meet our space standards. External amenity, the larger flats have balconies, as you can see. The smaller flats don't have balconies, but there is that external amenity area that you see here, and it's also within relatively close proximity to play and open space facilities. In terms of internal amenity, there are a number of conditions which deal with that noise transference issue between flats and floors, as well as the commercial. As a result of the air quality issues, as you'll see in the report, we feel that there is a need for a condition which covers the clean air ventilation. So we'll need to have details of those to support the internal amenity. On car parking, which is interesting that one of the councillors pointed this out at the last application, there is only 4 car parking spaces for the 13 flats. Our highways officer feel that this is acceptable in this sustainable location in such close proximity to Strood town centre and literally a stone's throw from Asda, from Aldi and the main town centre facilities, as well as being close to bus services, not too far from the railway station as well. That basis, Chairman, we're recommending approval subject to the section 106 as set out and the conditions as I amended in the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hubbard.
Yeah, there's a definite need for housing of this type in the town centres, and I can understand why there's going to be limited car parking spaces. The flats next door, which is in Gun Lane, Newark Court, and on the ones on North Street, are similar, very similar, have the same number of parking, existing parking spaces compared to the number of flats. Though it looks tall, it's actually next to the site that is of the same height, so it's, though it sounds very tall, it's actually 1 story. So actually what Mr. Harris said, yes, there's 1 story at the front, which is covered by steps. In fact, there's a story behind. So when you go to the back of the property, there are flats at the back, which are below those flats at the front, you could say. It's a very odd development. I have to say, it has one of the best views of Medway from one of those balconies. You walk up and you have the view across the viaduct with the castle and cathedral in the background. It's something that it is impressive to see the Victorian railway line running towards you as you look at more historic buildings in the background. I don't have a problem. The only problem I really had with this application is a shame it doesn't include the site next door. I never went to the Tucker Shovel. I've had people, one person was thrown out of the pub as I walked past it once. Apart from that, it was a shame that it's not been developed as one site. I think it would have been better if it was a one site development. But there you go. And those photographs are quite old, because I did point out to Mr. Harris sometime during the winter last year that the fence had blown down, and the hoardings seem to have been destroyed, but they have been fixed since on the other side.
I don't have anybody else who's indicated, so I'll move to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just before I move the recommendation, for the record, which Judy may kindly wish to note for us, as a self-confessed anorak as to detail, if you use a magnifying glass, you will see a different number, postal number, shown for this site on the Ordnance Survey extract on page 124. Mr. Harris looked into that and assures me that the application site postal address of 24 is correct, and that the number 54 on the Ordnance Survey for some reason is not correct. So we are dealing with 24 Gun Lane. That said, Madam Chairman, I move officer recommendation of approval. That is subject to the Section 106 agreement, subject to the conditions 1 to 27 that we have on the agenda papers, but I add in the other conditional matters to which Mr. Harris referred and which should be a part of any consent agreed tonight. So on that basis, moved.
Seconded. Thank you. Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. So that application succeeds, and that brings us to the last item for this evening, which is land south of Fenn Corner. And that, I believe, is Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for retrospective consent for the change of use from equestrian land for an extension of the already approved overflow car park for the Fenn Bell Pub and Zoo. This plan here shows the red line of the application site. The Fenn pub itself is located in the top of the screen. And then what we have here is a more up-to-date aerial photograph which shows the area of land to be used as an extension to the overflow alongside the existing overflow here. Probably what needs pointing out is that obviously this overflow car park was approved as part of a larger application in 2019. This is all effectively in place currently. Some hardcore has been laid to the front of the site here, which does help in wetter weather to prevent mud and mess onto the road. But it is literally just sort of a loose hardcore. There's no formal hard surfacing gone in. This application, this slide just clearly shows the extent of the already approved overflow car park and the area which, as I say, is retrospective, but which is the extension of that approved car park area. These photographs just help to show the extent of the site. The photo on the right-hand side shows the boundary with the properties on Bellwood Court, particularly properties, I believe, are numbers 2 and 3, Bellwood Court. And this slide here just shows the end of the site, which is subject to the application. What you can see at the end here, there's actually a bund that was put in place here, which was part of the levelling out of the front of the site, which was done when the overflow car park came into use. Just to conclude, this application does not actually result in any alterations or changes to the site as it currently stands. It's purely to regularise the current situation. There is no further hardcore being laid or proposed. There are conditions in place to ensure that there is no lighting and to ensure that no cars or materials are stored on the site at any time. And obviously, it should be noted that the approval for the overflow car park is in association with the operation of the zoo, and the zoo only, not the main pub. So it's only operational when the zoo is open. You'll see in the report that some of the neighbours have stipulated that the car park area here is actually considered to assist in ensuring that the road remains clear for other road users when the zoo is at its busiest times. The impact on the neighbours here is not considered to be significant in any way, shape or form, and for the reasons that I've set out, the recommendation is to approve.
Councillor Buckwell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wonder if Hannah could clarify, I may have missed it, but I can't see any reference to any objection or indeed favourable comment from the Parish Council at St Mary Who. Have they responded at all?
If I'd have seen it, I would have put it in the report, so I can only say I haven't seen anything from them.
Okay, and just one more point, if I may, Madam Chairman. There is reference to one of the 5 letters implying that there will be the loss of the pub in relation to this application. Is that correct? Do we know?
Not that I'm aware. In speaking with the landlord of the property, he runs the pub in conjunction and very closely with the zoo. It is to remain open.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have nobody else who's... Councillor Tijan.
Just a quick one from me, Chair, and that with regards to one of the representation suggesting for some planting to soften the visual aspect. Can we give that some sort of consideration as a condition?
The issue, just to comment, the issue that we've got here obviously is that it's only overflow car park. It's not something that's used regularly and isn't required to its full extent on a regular basis at all. The planting that is in place alongside the boundary with the residential properties in Bellwood Court appears to be significant enough as existing. I personally don't feel it necessary to put any further planting in between on the other side, on the fence line there, but that's entirely up to yourselves if you would wish for further landscaping on a condition.
Right. Councillor Backwell, are you going to move the recommendation?
I'd like just to come back, if I may, on the basis of what Hannah has just said. I go past this site several times a week. It is well parked. I wonder, Madam Chairman, if we could delegate to officers to look at that issue of screening, because I think it's well made. The few times I've been past recently, that has been full with at least 2 rows of cars.
So if you look on Google Earth, maybe you could pull it up. There does appear to be planting around the edge anyway, already.
I don't know. Screens is appalling. It's like a fog.
I think the trouble is the lighting's too bright, isn't it? That's, yeah,
it's dreadful.
I think what we need to do is screen those lots to
Maybe.
lights so they don't go that way.
The audience told me earlier they couldn't hear a thing either.
I think you'd have making a new bigger route for the meetings and forecasts. We're actively looking at the moment, but
we might not be running the council now.
Chairman, thank you very much. The reason for the hesitation is because Carly has checked the our website, and there is actually a representation from the parish council. So I think it's right that she articulates what that says for members. The second point is in relation to landscaping. Yes, if members are minded to approve, then you could impose an additional condition regarding landscaping. But I think it's important for this process that you hear the representation from the parish council.
Sorry, there has been the representation from St Mary Who Parish Council. The points that have been made specify that they feel that the zoo has already expanded at an alarming rate and believe that they're effectively flouting planning laws. They're saying that the extended area is used for cars and coaches throughout the year. The consent was for 60 car parking spaces. It's been extended beyond the permitted drawings. The application is retrospective and undermines the planning process. It states that the permitted parking area to be approximately a third of the size of what is actually being used currently. They believe that this has doubled the number of visitors to the zoo, and there's concern that they will expand further. They have said that there are residents that have complained in relation to noise and privacy. Those points are actually covered within the representations. And they show that it should be, they say that it should be retained for agricultural use and object on that basis.
Can I make a suggestion? This is a retrospective application, so that car park is already there. There are issues about who said what and who did what. Nothing is going to change. I would prefer that this comes back to the next planning committee with the correct information. Yeah. As I said, the car park is already there, it's already being used, but members need to be clear on what it is that they're discussing. So would you agree that this goes from this committee? Okay, agreed. Thank you. That concludes the planning applications for this evening. There are a couple of issues which flow from the last meeting of this committee, which Mr Harris wishes to address you on.
Chairman, thank you very much. And I have emailed all members about this, but I appreciate that not all of you may have had the opportunity to see the email. Members, at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, you refused the 2 applications at Seymour Farm and Moore Street. The next day, and you refused on 3 grounds: highways, heritage and landscape. Now, the next day we received notifications that appeals will be lodged on both those. So I needed to move very quickly because I want to defend the strongest possible way members' reasons for refusal. So I appointed counsel, I appointed a landscape consultant, I appointed a heritage consultant, I appointed a highways consultant. And we've worked very hard over the last 2 weeks on the reasons to come up with reasons for refusal. Now, we're very comfortable with the highways reasons for refusal. The heritage reason for refusal, the consultant there is satisfied, as is counsel, that we can mount a heritage argument on both sites. We don't think it would stand up if that was the only reason for refusal, but as a second one to the highways one, we're comfortable with that. However, on the landscape side, we are very nervous on that. Now, the landscape consultant I appointed, we've used him on a number of appeals very successfully. He argued the landscape concerns on Upner, he argued the landscape concerns on Pump Farm, he tried to argue the landscape concerns on East Hill, and we all know that we were very disappointed with that decision. He argued landscape concerns on Orchard Kennels. So very successful, very good consultant. What he is saying is that he could not substantiate a reason for refusal on landscape grounds. Discussing that with counsel's view is that you should drop the landscape reasons for refusal and just go with the highways and the heritage ones. He does feel if that you continue to argue the landscape, the consequences are you might lose with costs on that basis. But secondly, there are other cases like other applications where you want to argue the landscape concerns, and he feels that if you continue to argue them on the Rainham ones, it actually weakens your case on landscape on more serious cases. So council's advice is, yeah, he's very happy, highways, heritage, but drop the landscape one. And I have circulated the reasons for refusal, so hopefully members can agree those. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Harris. I think that that's a very sensible suggestion. There is no point in asking our team to go in and defend decisions if we don't give them the proper advice and the proper way to do it. So I'm asking for agreement to that. Yes, is that agreed? Okay. Thank you very much. And that concludes the meeting.